Hey, it is your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth on a great Vera question, and that is to discuss the role of addiction and the experience of addiction in a narcissist or psychopath relationship. So, understanding what is addiction and then understanding the dynamics of a narcissist or psychopath relationship with someone who is targeted, scoped out, sized up, used as a scapegoat, isolated, a very, sundry different situations that arise in that dynamic. You must also understand the presence of an addiction or an addictive quality to these relationships, namely that of an emotional or psychoactive addiction. That is where your brain essentially has been hyper aroused, and other wires and neurons that wire and fire together begin to expand and expand in that area, and it carves sort of a higher threshold, if you will, within the brain. If you study addiction, you'll understand that there's usually a certain level of a buzz or some sort of agitation that the individual experiences as pleasurable or rewarding. That's the experience of dopamine or the the bonding chemical. Oxytocin, well, that's, also experienced like in childbirth, but there's these other sort of bonding experiences that go through in the beginning that creates and sets one up for addiction and really a dependence on these individuals as part of their pathological personality disorder, a cluster B or a psychopath. So, namely, the common ground there is a lack of empathy and a pathological sense of self-importance, and then how it then sets up how they approach you, the relationship, and then how they manipulate your perspective, your sense of self, your reaction, especially what you attend to and what you focus on, and where you spend your focus, your attention, and what you want or are then cultivating in the course of the relationship is very significant. So the narcissist and the psychopath also sort of have this propensity, I would say, for boredom. They don't like to just sit around and do nothing. So, when we're talking about a female psychopath, we're talking about someone who might have like an inordinate or excessive amount of energy. They might be able to maintain a lot of plates in the air. And even though these are great management, techniques or skills of people in professional life and things of this nature, but we're talking about a certain set of experiences in a personal relationship that involve sort of a high frequency or a high energy that is based on sort of the predisposition of fantasy or grandiosity, or my dreams are being fulfilled, or my weakness is somehow alleviated. And whether you were, individually targeted and you were sort of lonely, or just out of a relationship, or just out of a new job, or, there usually is some unmet need that sort of draws this individual to you. And then it's the satisfaction of that, and then the sort of corroding of your awareness, and you're replacing sort of what you feel is your mundane reality, which people usually are willing to let go of in exchange for the sort of fantasy, hyper arousal, the charm, with all the different qualities, the sex appeal, the seduction, the alluring in, the psychopathic gaze, the narcissist, narcissist word salad, and all of their different ways of communicating that create this level of hyper arousal in others, meaning not just attraction, but we're talking about a certain level of hyper arousal and then addiction or dependence, because they need to get into this feeling or pacify the tension that it has created, namely a sexual tension, a financial tension, a reputation tension, some sort of tension, if you will, in this. And so it needs to be released. It needs to be discharged. It needs to be fulfilled. So this is kind of this is sort of their game, if you will. They love to have the attention, and the narcissist has an insatiable need really to be the center of attention and admiration. So they always like it on an asymmetry level. This is the problem with these types of relationships, is there oftentimes is not an expression of balance. It's kind of like, well, aren't you so lucky to hang out with me sort of vibe that they put out. And so, they kind of only feel that they should be required to hang around certain types of people or do specific things for themselves or for others. So they have a sort of a grandiose sense of self-importance. So think someone who thinks that they always deserve special treatment, they deserve handouts, they deserve special rules broken. Don't worry, you'll get away with it. We'll let you go. Just off the hook. So these people who are sort of living by entitlement, that they expect certain things should be given, or certain attention should be given to them, and others should not. They should not have to give others like in return. So it creates an imbalance in relationships. But in the beginning, a very important trait that you must acknowledge about a female psychopath, and also sort of the malignant narcissist, is that discomfort with boredom. In other words, they like to sort of be on the go. I mean, all the time. And they will oftentimes be in these, thrilling situations that they will create for their spouse or their source. There's always level of a thrill seeking. So the thrill is kind of like you're getting addicted to some sort of buzz, some sort of stimulation, which oftentimes, is all body encompassing. So it's very much, and I think the reason of the addiction is that this feels like unlike anybody else. This is so, in other words, all of a sudden, all my pains are relieved. I don't feel like I have to, in other words, there's this sort of satisfying of the presence of this individual. And yeah, you have good friends who are like this as well. It's like, oh my God, I haven't talked to you for so long. But there becomes sort of a dependency that is created, not an interdependency where you're respected for your uniqueness, your individuality, for who you are and how you think. As long as, to a narcissist, if you conform to what they need you to be, then you're sort of okay. You're sort of in the inner circle. But, then when they go on, when they sort of get bored with that very easily, they don't like, the regular, the predictable, they want to sort of bounce on those extremes. And it's always about a sense of self-importance. So that gives them this sort of extreme, focus that other people sort of get this buzz or addiction to because of the things that they might say, the grandiose things, or I'm gonna do this amount of business, or I've got this and this lined up, or and they're sort of always but even on the daily, we're talking about really on a daily basis, not a once in a while boredom. We're talking really on a very regular and routine that they need to belay their boredom. They need this hyper arousal, and oftentimes this leads into high risk behavior. High risk behavior, which means, based on the risk involved, the results really aren't really worth it, or they're hard to come by or hard to attain. So there's always then that lure that, let me just, they will then try to get other people involved or sweep them into that sort of extreme behavior. But the hyper arousal, so in other words, saying provocative things in your ear and then walking away, sort of flirting very, very strongly, and then, not seeing you for a long period of time, just that makes you miss them, and you get into a game of cat and mouse chase, and oftentimes that game only builds up a tension in others. So that tension really begins to build up and becomes a facet of the addiction. So sort of that playing that psychopathic game of hyperarousal that violates oftentimes your sense of self in order to participate in the relationship. Meaning, you must temporarily degrade yourself or violate your own boundaries and standards to succumb, go along with, or fulfill the relationship. So you might say this person had a bad influence. They were, had a degrading influence, a negative influence, a destructive influence on me in this specific area of time. So you might be able to see that, but then what was in place of it? What was the, addiction? Was it the looks that they would get you distracted, and then, or the things that they would say and that would make you fearful, or the things that they would do or not do? In other words, not giving you a text, not giving you a picture, not sending you the email, whatever it is, show up for the holiday that made you go, wait, something is awry here, and then built up a tension, and then you had to sort of clamor to get it back or up the ante to stay in the relationship. In other words, you crossed one line, and then to stay in was another line and another line. And then that creates an isolation, because really it's only in that very small inner circle where maybe these behaviors are going on. And then the psychopath will always interpret it as, I am smarter than others, because, they feel that normal human emotions like compassion and empathy just sort of slow you down and take you away from your goal quicker. So if they can just make a beeline to something, whatever it is that they want, that is the ultimate. But of course, there's societal rules and norms in place, so they have to put on their best behavior. They know this. They know this about themselves. It's all deliberate, calculated beforehand, before you even knew. So they understand how they get people hyper aroused and then addicted, and clueless as to why they feel this way. So when they see, people crawling back, bending to their will, being flexible and then way too flexible, and then, before you know it, this person sort of becomes nothing but a what they feel is a spitting image of who they used to be. And then they don't really recognize themselves for who they are, because you've sort of been allowed yourself to be, well, you didn't allow, but oftentimes people were unconsciously, unknowingly being molded or sculpted by this hyper arousal, which is based in a valueless relationship. This is part of the problem, is that a relationship with a psychopath does not have a staying power. I mean, in other words, they have no qualms about sort of things like divorce, being late for very important meetings, leaving their kids behind, not allowing their kids to have time doing X, Y, or Z, or missing their schedule, and they don't feel a tinge of guilt or anger. Well, if you weren't so needy, usually there's something either spoken or unspoken that's communicating that, your problems are too little compared to my life or what's important. So they will then minimize or make very little like what you're going through or you're experiencing. And it's not about cry wolf. We're talking about realistic, normal types of concerns. We're not talking about made up, crying for attention fights. We're talking about other real significant ways that people are treated or mistreated in a relationship, a family, or a work system. And the disputing, and then the simultaneous disputing of your feelings becomes a sort of part or contingent, the flip side of the addiction. So then people become addicted to really denying their own feelings or becoming self-created, self-made, independent, positive self-esteem. So they must simultaneously deny that if they're fulfilling, the female psychopath. This is just, it's, you can't be in the both worlds simultaneously. That's just my feeling. And then the addiction then is that hyper arousal, usually of that excitement, that looking forward, that anticipation, the butterflies, the romance. It's so exciting. I wonder what we're going to do or see, or, usually there's some sort of intimacy that we're talking about here. or some big, business plan that is, part of the, it might be all about making money, or, sexual intensity, or, that's usually part of it. But then there's this contortion of the mind in the way that things are seen, perceived, and values are given to. It's literally a brainwashing. So it's very intense, and the brainwashing is part of the addiction also. So just like when you hear, people have been brainwashed, like, soldiers of war, it is that, or cult-like. You must understand that there is something that this person has, sort of opened up their control, if you will, to this ne'er-do-well, and sort of working the levers as to what you feel, what you act on, and what you stay, that is part of the talents of the addiction. Addiction that you don't know that you're addicted to because you've never identified it before, and it masquerades itself like love, like the real thing, like your the answer to your prayers, the one who came riding in on the horse, or, just connected with you and made you feel better than anybody else. They really met those needs. It was like a custom fit. This is what the psychopath does. They have an altered way, I would say, of perceiving and looking things, and they know just what to do and say. They'll tell you, they'll tell people what they want to hear, but at a different level than most people can even grasp. So they're able to do and say what people want to hear to gain their trust, but then they lose their guard and they don't really see what's happening in front of their very own eyes anymore. It's part of the psychopathic, I would say, sort of hypnotic control, the neuro-linguistic programming, the resetting of your perception, the way you look at things, how you interpret things and connect things, how you process, temporarily becomes disabled while they sort of get in there and control. This is brainwashing. This is gaslighting. It's changing your sense of reality. And then that altered sense of reality is then part of the addiction. So you're then addicted to this altered state of mind or altered state of reality, which for the psychopath, they know the wham job that they're putting on people. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. Bamboozle is kind of, but it's worse than that. It's hard to find a word to understand deceive. I think con is a better, a better con man or a con woman. Especially, that is, they are out for something. But the hyper arousal is, that engaging in these high risk or thrill seeking engagements. Wherever it is, there's usually a boundary that gets pushed. We're staying up later, we're drinking more, we're buying more, we're doing this, we're, the flirtation that just doesn't end, and, even at the workplace, they're trying to, while they're supposed to be attending to something else, they're keeping the sexual hyperarousal going 24/7, 36/5, and they're just sort of diluting and filling and flooding the mind of their target with certain chemical experiences that are designed to make them easy to manipulate, easy to get what they want, sort of change their perception and create a language that I would say is very enigmatic and idiosyncratic to the relationship. Enigmatic meaning puzzling, meaning that there's something very puzzling, a puzzle that cannot be answered in the course of this. It might sound very strange if you have not encountered a psychopath, but there's an enigma, meaning there's a puzzle, a riddle, something that doesn't ever get sort of understood. What's coming to mind now is like Batman and Robin, and wasn't there someone, the Riddler? It's kind of like that character. So you're talking about a character that you don't see in your everyday life, but yet they are in your everyday life. If you could put them on a screen, it would be more like the Riddler or the Joker, or like you used to see in the good old Batman and Robin days, like the bad guys, the villains. But it's difficult because you don't see that they are villains because they're in your marriage, they're in the workplace, they are very good at hiding. I mean, we're talking beyond normal. And, and then also then with the disputing of feelings becomes part of the addiction. So realize that the hyper arousal can be like a hyper arousal of sexual stimulation, sort of getting the body numbed out with endorphins, from causing lack of sleep. So oftentimes these people will, disrupt your normal routine or your day to day. That's too normal. Why don't you stay up until 4 and do X, Y, and Z? Why don't we just text all through work and it's like we're not working? Why don't you just do this, and while you're eating anyway, even though this is your, time to work, just here's my picture, or they're, things like that they know are disruptive. And then sort of reset and recalibrate sort of the level of excitement, I would say, that the person then gets used to being aroused to. So everything else, so it's kind of like it's kind of like, I would say, then that fear of returning then is that emptiness. So people don't want to return to themselves because they feel that they don't have anything to return to within themselves. It's because that's part of the masquerade of the psychopath, is that they sort of also usually will dispute your feelings or your regular concerns. You don't have to worry about that now. We don't have to, that'll be later, and so you don't realize that certain things that are important to you are just sort of getting, you're getting a numb shot, a free shot, so that you won't feel it anymore as part of the hyper arousal, and then sort of locking into place like the pieces of a puzzle to give you a new perspective. In other words, there's like a click-like mechanism where you feel you just click with this person. All of a sudden, you're smiling. You don't know why. All of a sudden, you're laughing. You don't know why. All of a sudden, there's this very attractive or charming, and this person's bending this way, or, doing that, and then big smile, all the different, charming, and then the sex appeal. This is part of the psychopath. I think that they always will have this sort of lure in the beginning, or the sob story. So there's either going to be that or the sob story. My arm is broken. Can't you help me fill my tank up with gas? I mean, what was that? John Wayne Gacy, I just, came through this. They've got the war stories, the battle stories, the previous divorce, the previous this, usually they're down on their luck. And so then it's coupled with sort of feeling sorry for them. Usually I would say is part of the pattern. And then, and so then you have to sort of turn an indifferent ear to yourself when, in the course of this, but then the addiction of being with them, it sort of pacifies it, and it's a better reality or a better alternative as you're interpreting it is based on part of the addiction is to get you into denial. That's part of the addiction. You also become, I would say, addicted to the denial of what you need or want or should be doing, and you allow it to float. That the addiction is sort of carrying you from one day to another until it becomes a vast amount of time, and you don't really then see that certain promises were able to be fulfilled. Maybe financial promises couldn't be fulfilled. Well, something might have happened. We're talking about like just things like, well, we were going to get married, we were going to do this business, these other life changes that eventually they'll go poof and disintegrate, and they will just move on to the next person. But the addiction that is usually a very custom sort of personality, that they will then sense your weaknesses almost through like x-ray vision, sense your weaknesses and then satisfy them, and you don't even realize it. So it could be, you need to feel like a man, you need to feel like a woman, you need to feel this or that. Then all of a sudden, you're feeling these things with this person, and then you're quelled for this. But the addiction then becomes really into another level and another dimension, which is not in the empowered, and which is not in, in a reality. And then you're really then living in a reactive mode pretty soon. rather than a responsive mode. And people have a difficult time, then I would say, in the addiction, toggling, meaning getting your self-control back from the reactive to the responsive. So it's like the mind gets very, very wound up in the course of these relationships, and it has to sort of come down and reach a homeostasis, sort of untangle itself. Like all sorts of new neural connections are being made that sort of confuse and counteract and conflict your normal process. So you have to sort of detox from that sort of reactiveness, that sort of level of arousal, and then find a strength within instead that's even more miraculous, which is even more, becoming more sensitive to yourself and your true desires and what makes you happy, and then having the audacity to follow up with that, even if it's counterintuitive to the denial that you were engaged in that addiction. So like breaking the addiction, no longer doing A, B, and C. Instead, you're doing X, Y, and Z, which is really fulfilling and nurturing and nourishing of you, and gives you self-esteem and something true, that cannot be taken from you. So it's kind of like you need to come to that next level, and then heal around that, and then be able to sort of detox and see it for what it was. But it is addictive, just like I would say something like one needs a substance, like how people might get addicted to cocaine or heroin. So it's a similar thing. The brain is experiencing a surge, of these certain pleasure neurochemicals. So that surge also is a similar, I would say, a similar pattern to that psychopathic relationship, that buzz, that surge, and then just sort of, and then, people are just never knowing what that is, but then it feels powerful. And so they lose power over the attraction. And sometimes that feels like a relief because they don't want to be in control all the time, or, so they're losing control to this person. And then pretty soon their life is becoming out of control, and it's difficult to regain control and sort of that normalcy and productivity. So that's just a little bit on the qualities of how what would set up a relationship with a psychopath that would serve to create an addiction and a dependency and a disempowerment is part of the satisfaction of that psychopathic bond, one of really manipulation, which is based out of a no conscience or no regret sort of mentality. It has no sense of humanity or warmth to it. It is the devoid of those things, and then that is why it's so perpendicular to oftentimes what you need, and being unaddicted or being in control and having true security and serenity. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.